Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yes. This is Blue Please right here on CynicalBrit.com with myself, Total Biscuit. It is the night before Cata. It's the last show before Cataclysm launch. To remind people, I will be down at the Cataclysm launch event on the 6th through the 7th. Obviously, that's the midnight launch down in Leicester Square. I will be there. It will be fairly easy to spot me. If you want to troll, by the way, come in a top hat. Like every one of you. Every one of you that's going, get a top hat. Even if it's just a little plastic top hat, or you have to hire it. Get a top hat and confuse the hell out of everybody. It's going to be awesome. Seriously. But yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to find me. I'll have the best top hat. Right. So, we're going to be looking at some of your emails. Bad Wrath memories. I'll be, no doubt, giving you anecdotes and stuff like that. We're going to reflect on just how horrendous a bunch of the stuff in Wrath actually was, and how we're really looking forward to Cataclysm washing that away. So I get to have a final massive burst of negativity before the initial yay of the whole Cataclysm launch. The funny thing is, you might say, oh, well, Total Biscuit, that was just like your Wrath launch. It actually wasn't. If you go all the way back to my actual Wrath shows, and obviously that does take a little bit of digging. Ooh, because when was that? Yeah. I was still on WoW Radio at the time. So, I was still in Season 3 of the show. So, it would have to be sort of mid-ish of Season 3 that you can find. You can look at the old archives over on WCRadio.com. Now, what you will have found, actually, even in the first two shows, there was a massive amount of negativity. It was actually the biggest amount of negativity I had about Wrath was that the raid content was cleared in 3 days. And people were telling me at the time, oh, well, that's just because these guys are leaked. Nah. And as it turns out, of course, I was right. It's not because those guys were leaked. It was because it was too easy. And look, we got 6 months of nothing. Yeah. Indeed. It's nice to be a prophet. Okay, folks, emails. We have an awful lot of them. We'll start off from the top, shall we? Dear TB, long-time fan, first-time rider. This is Alexander Gomez sending in this one. I have to say the worst part of Wrath had to be Naxxramas, Lich King. Naxxramas was the first time I was really exposed to a major raid since I didn't raid in Villa or BC. Oh, you poor, poor dear. Oh, wow. In other words, you were exposed to one of the worst instances they ever created. It's so sad, because, and I've said this before, and it's so very true, that they took one of the best ones they'd ever made, and they ruined it. In every way. And their justification was, well, most people haven't seen this content anyway, so it's entirely fine to recycle it into some kind of bastardized form, a declawed form. Oh. You know what? People that came in with Wrath, or indeed maybe if just came in with TBC, probably never experienced what the original Naxxramas was like, and will never see its like again. And they think that Nax is the worst thing ever. So sad, isn't it? You know, you should be thankful that they haven't redone Sunwell or anything yet. Although, what I have to say is that they sort of murdered Sunwell anyway, because they flat 30% nerfed everything towards the end of the expansion, so Sunwell is not the way it used to be. None of the TBC stuff is. You know what, I actually asked them point blank, not only on a podcast, but in a big forum post, to revert those changes, to roll them back. Did they? No, they didn't. There's no point in doing TBC content anymore, there isn't. They completely ruined it, and back in the day I said this, because look, we're going to ruin this so that, you know, the rest of it looks better by comparison. We don't want you going back to the old stuff, the time that was really good. We want you doing our new stuff, even though our new stuff's awful. Ah, man. It's so true, though. Anyway, going on with this email, it says, when I finished it, however, and had one or two items, I felt a sense of loss. It didn't feel epic. Leveling up in vanilla, everyone spoke so highly of Nax, yet the new one just didn't feel cool. I feel like it didn't really do anything, yet completed it so easily. Well, you're right! It's because you really don't have to take any responsibility for anything that you do in Naxxramas 2.0. You fail the dance? Oh, it's fine. Don't worry, you'll just get healed by the healer with his infinite mana pool. You just stand in it. It doesn't matter. So horrible. Oh, it really is, man. It really, really is. Disgraceful, really. You're totally right. It's interesting to see the perspective of someone that just started raiding in Wrath, because I have to wonder how many more people are like this guy. How many more people got the impression that raiding actually sucked as a direct result of the Wrath style? I have to have a feeling it's more than this one dude, honestly. I can see how you would grow to despise raiding. It's like, well, what's the big deal, you know? It's just a bigger dungeon with more people and purpley loot. There's nothing hard about any of this stuff. Yeah, you know, that's the impression that Naxxramas gave. Ulduar fixed things, but then TOC didn't. Like, oh, look, it's TOC. Right, okay, that's really, really easy. And then the vast majority of ICC is also really, really easy. And then you've got a bunch of the hard modes of ICC that are also really, really easy. At which point you turn around and say, Total Biscuit, how can you say that? Because you haven't done it. At which time I turn around and say, I haven't flown around the world, but I don't think it's flat. Jeez, what a terrible, terrible idea. Right. Okay. This one comes in from Bentley Barnes. Dear TB, I've played for all 3 expansions, and one thing that made Wrath of the Lich King unbearably easy was the fact that in Dungeons and Heroics, you didn't have the need to use crowd control. A lot of people who have only just started WoW with Wrath don't even know what CC stands for. Hopefully, that in Kata, they'll bring back CC and make things a lot more difficult for us. Also the same term as die in a fire. Indeed. Oh, jeez. So, the thing about CC is that CC is a weird thing. CC doesn't necessarily make things hard, but what it does is it introduces an element of danger. That's the thing about it. That's what makes CC good. If you use crowd control, generally speaking, it's because not using crowd control would make the actual dungeon way harder. To the point where you are thinking, I need to make this easier. I cannot afford not to use crowd control. And it's not the active crowd control itself that is good. You know, hammering a crowd control button is not... It's not good. It's not entertaining, honestly. Oh, wow. Okay, one of my streams has just fallen over. It should sort itself out momentarily, I hope. Yep, it's just resuming right now, or trying to. Oh, Christ. So, I run across a cluster of 2 servers, and it looks like my one over on VTW Productions has now just crashed. And I'm not sure there's actually anything I can do about it either. Hell on a stick. God damn it. Now, we can get people on the other server, but it only has 1,000 capacity, so that could be problematic. No, it's back up. Right, VTW is back up now. So, you should be good. Anyway, those of you listening on the podcast, no time has passed. Oh, well. Right. Yeah, that's the thing about crowd control. It's not the action, it's the reason. It's the rationale behind using it that makes it good. Because that represents the fact that the dungeon is actually challenging, to the point that you have to use crowd control. Because if you don't, you will die horribly. And it also introduces that element of danger. Oh god, it's broken! Quick, better re-CC! Oh god, it's in the AoE! Oh god, the pain and suffering. That's a good thing. That adds to the way that a dungeon works. It brings tension, it brings focus, and it brings enjoyment. Simply through the medium of challenge. Okay. This is a good one. One particularly shameful Wrath memory. This is actually about Naxxramas again. Needless to say, Naxxramas is a fairly common theme amongst these emails. To my dearest Total Biscuit. Oh god. I do hope you're female. It's unlikely. This demographic of my show is 90% male. Statistically unlikely. I had my worst Wrath experience while raiding in, or do I even need to say it, Naxxramas, especially in early 2009, when the instance had been done to death several times over. Months of grinding the same place every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I have to wonder, actually, why it took you that long to grind it. I mean, you could beat Naxxramas in about 4 hours, but then you're not necessarily taking into account the people that suck. Anyway, Months and months and months of grinding the same place, often after waking up from inadequate sleep, had its effects on me. I was half asleep while grudgingly shambling through these halls, trying to focus. Did it affect my performance? I don't know. There isn't much room for improvement when it's frickin' Naxxramas. Damn right. I'll tell you something about Naxxramas. The most challenging thing about Naxxramas was the achievement for it, the Immortal. Was it the Immortal or the Undying? I think the Undying was the 10 mana. I'm fairly sure the Immortal was the 25. So basically, don't have anyone die in a boss fight. The problem was that getting it, especially for the time that it mattered, you know, it's stabilized now, but for the first 6 months of the expansion, we had a lot of instance instability. And most of that actually came from freaking Wintergrasp. I don't know why, but that's just the way it was coded. It didn't work properly. And I cannot count the number of times that we failed on Undying or Immortal because somebody lagged out. Like, oh god, he DC'd. Oh god, he died to some AoE effect or whatever. GG. It actually happened more so than anything else on Thaddeus, which is fairly appropriate considering Thaddeus did exactly the same thing in Vanilla. And yet they didn't fix it. This goddamn polarity effect still causes lag even to this day. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it still actually causes frame skip, it causes lag, and some people do DC from it. During the beta, actually, we had a very disturbing trend where anything that was a hard disable, and I really have to hope that this has been resolved, I assume it has, but whatever the case, anything that was a hard disable would actually disconnect you from the server entirely. So mind controls, grabs, force chokes, things like that, hard disables, they would just throw you off the server entirely. And with Wrath, when we were trying to do Undying and Immortal, and it's actually the reason we just gave up on it eventually, was because we'd always have somebody DC on Thaddeus or whatever and end up dying from polarity, and oh god. It was just, why even bother at that point, you know? And they actually introduced this later on. They changed things around so that you could, if you got a perfect kill on an individual boss, it would count towards your achievement. Needless to say, we didn't even bother with that either. I mean, we were looking towards doing it in Ulduar, and then we said, right, you know what, we actually can't be arsed. You want to know why? Because we can't be arsed. You know, we did Yogg-Saron, and we did some of the hard modes, and just by that point, it was falling into the same problem that we've had with the rest of the content. And people always ask me, and they'll never really learn, a lot of them are just trying to flame, but the legitimate people that always ask me, why exactly have you not done all of these things? Well, the answer is simply this. When you are forced to go into the same dungeon for 6 months at a time, possibly 3+ times a week, you have no desire to go back in again. I stopped raiding a couple of months into the Ulduar patch. You want to know why? Because I was bored. It's the same dungeon over and over and again. And of course, you don't want to go back to anything else. There's no alternatives. There was nothing else at that tier level. And what, you gotta count Emelon? I don't think so. I certainly hope not. That's why Cataclysm is so much better in that regard. They've actually understood their mistake. And yes, what a mistake it was. What an error. Consider that for a second. What an error having only one dungeon per tier, and then these massive gaps between content. I'll tell you. If we want to look at exactly the differences, you know, there's a massive, great extension of this. So, in patch 3.2, you got TOC, yeah? And this was probably the smallest gap between content that we had. But, regardless, the release of Secrets of Ulduar was on the April the 14th. And then, we went on to August the 4th for TOC. And you might think, well, that seems rather reasonable, but it's not really. Not really. Because the thing is, TOC completely replaced everything that was in Ulduar. So by that point, you were basically jumping on, it's like, oh god, new content, oh, it's only 5 bosses and it only takes an hour, and there's like 5 heroics. Oh, just, why, you know? I had no reason at all to even do anything during the Call of the Crusade. I did TOC a few times and I never wanted to go back. I had no desire to go back into that boring, bland, lifeless place in order to fight bosses, even in heroic mode. This is the expansion that sapped the will to play from me. And that is so very sad, because I don't want to stop playing. You know, I've played WoW for longer than I've played any other MMO now. You know, it's surpassed the amount of time I spent on PlanetSide. Hell, it's even surpassed the amount of time that I spent on an old Telnet mud called Moom. Multi-users in Middle-earth. I played that for years. But now, WoW is the MMO that's stuck with me. So, if you think that I want this content to be bad, you're wrong. Which is why I hated the way Wrath did things, and why I'm loving the way Cataclysm's doing things. My name is Total Biscuit, you're listening to Blue Please right here on CynicalBit.com. Are we going to play more Machine Eye Supremacy? That's a pretty stupid question, isn't it? Rocket Dragon? Yes, enjoy.